Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its mythology and what it's like to fight in game as well. In these videos I like to use your suggestions for monsters that you'd like to see, so if there is a monster you'd like to see me draw or hear the mythology and lore of, and hear me explain in way too much depth, make sure to leave that down below in the comments section so I can add it to my to-draw list, which my patrons over on Patreon get to vote on every month. Just like today's suggestion of the Nuckelavee, a monster that I have been desperate to cover, that isn't actually in D&D technically, but I've had to do some homebrewing and stuff, but I'll get to that later on in the video. Either way, today's suggestion was actually first made pretty much simultaneously by two different people. Both Robbie Koala and Apocalyptic Moth suggested that I cover the Nuckelavee, so I think it's only fitting that I mention both of them as the first people to come up with this suggestion. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let's get started.
Every crops were blighted by sea gust or mildew. Every livestock fell over high rocks that scut the shores. Or if an epidemic raged among men, or among the lower animals, Nuckelavee was the cause of all. His breath was venom, falling like blight on vegetable, and with deadly disease on animal life.
Thank you so much, Greg, from my D&D group, for reading that passage of an eyewitness account of the Nuckelavee by a man named Tamas, which was documented by Walter Dennison in his 1891 book, Orkney, Folklore and Sea Myths, for the Scottish Antiquary, or Northern Notes and Queries, for the Edinburgh University Press. So from that passage we have some indication of what the Nuckelavee is. But this creature, also known as the Devil of the Sea, is a hideous and terrifying creature taken from Orcadian folklore, Orcadian meaning those stories belonging to the Orkney Isles in northern Scotland. This creature is said to resemble a horse and its rider, who have both been flayed, in other words, their skin removed. And while they may first appear to be two creatures, they are instead actually only one. The rider part of this creature ends at the waist with no legs to be seen. This torso sprouts from the spine of the horse-like body where a rider would be sat, to give the illusion of something familiar to a passer in the night. But it's only on closer inspection that the true horror of this creature is revealed. While Orkney is very much a part of Scotland, it's famous for the bizarre creatures, myths and legends that circulate throughout its isles. They're somewhat cut off from the mainland, and as a result are also distinct from mainstream Scottish folklore. This is in no small part due to the numerous invasions from ancient Norse settlers whose stories infused Orcadian myths with elements from Scandinavian folklore, which muddled together with existing Celtic fables and created some altogether unique creations. The name Nuckelavee, despite how very purely ancient and Scottish it sounds, is actually an anglicised reimagining of the Orcadian Nuckelavee, spelled Knoggelvi, which refers to a distinctly different creature known as a noggle or a nuggle, which is a shape-shifting beast which can assume any creature's form, but usually likes to take the shape of a riderless horse. This creature would wait around the pools, rivers and streams of Hoy, one of the southernmost isles in Orkney, and anyone foolish enough to try and ride this horse would be fused to its back and dragged under the water where they would drown to death. Scottish and Orcadian folklore features a lot of murderous semi-aquatic horse-based creatures, from the Celtic water horse to the very famous Kelpie, so it seems unsurprising that the Nuckelavee takes on similar elements. An 18th to 19th century English antiquarian and geologist named Samuel Hibbert Ware of the Fellowship of the Royal Society of Edinburgh at Scotland's National Academy of Science and Letters postulated that the root of the word nuck in Nuckelavee is likely to be derived from the phrase Old Nick, a title often awarded to the Judeo-Christian devil, and a parallel is often made between the Nuckelavee and the devil, hence its title being the Devil of the Sea. But there's still actually a lot of debate about the origin of its name. The Nuckelavee is also a popular legend in Shetland, where the creature is spelled and pronounced Muckelavee with an M rather than an N. Personally, I think that it's likely that the Nuckelavee owes some part of its name and subsequent legends to a common trope across all Proto-Germanic languages and cultures. There's always some variation of a creature, sometimes known as the Nixie, the Nix, the Nicken, the Nacken, the Nikor, the Nock, the Necker, the Danish Nokker, the Finnish Nikki, the Old English Nikor, which are always humanoid and often shape-shifting water spirits, perhaps most recently publicised in Western mythology and media through the form of the Necker in the Witcher franchise. All of these creatures' names are derived from the Germanic phrase Neig, N-E-I-G, meaning to wash, and all creatures who draw inspiration from these legends tend to be mischievous, malevolent spirits who emerge from a body of water of some kind, and have a propensity to drown wanderers and travellers who are on their own. Perhaps due to the nature of the Orcadian Isles being, isles, and thus surrounded by the sea, typically the Nuckelavee would emerge from the sea, where it was originally some sort of formless, unknowable evil beneath the waves, and its transition to the land would forge it and force it to become some sort of skinless horse and rider fusion, but only once part of its body emerged from the water. Unlike a lot of similar myths, for the Nuckelavee, not all water is this creature's friend. The Nuckelavee is said to hate fresh water, it cannot cross it, and it cannot stand the presence of rain, for example, which, here in Scotland, means that actually seeing this creature will only occur once in a blue moon. This also means, and has been demonstrated in numerous stories, that we know that a fleeing victim can escape the Nuckelavee by crossing a stream or river that's too wide for this creature to jump. Tales of the Nuckelavee are also tied to another Orcadian legend, a creature known as the Sea Mither, or the Mither of the Sea. A creature who deserves her own lore video, but the general gist is that she's some sort of incredibly powerful sea spirit or water goddess, who's said to imprison the Nuckelavee beneath the waves during the summer months, but cannot contain it as her hold on the oceans weakens during the autumn and winter, during which time she does battle with a potent storm spirit or god, known as Terran, who is her arch nemesis. While her attention is divided, the Nuckelavee slips away onto the land and is free to hunt the living until the Sea Mither can recapture this cruel devil. But with it being the autumn and winter months, and with this storm spirit raging across the land, the chances of rain are much, much higher. So tales of the Nuckelavee, although very popular, are sparse because this creature can only come on land when it's not raining during autumn, which is pretty rare here. That said, according to Denison, the gentleman that I cited earlier on, tales of this creature are so widespread because the Nuckelavee has, quote, extensive evil powers, end quote, and its malevolent behaviour can influence events throughout the entire set of Orcadian islands. It was so feared in Orkney that, a bit like Voldemort, no one would voluntarily speak its name without uttering some kind of prayer afterwards for fear of drawing the creature's attention or summoning it somehow. And while the definition of, quote, extensive evil powers and the ability to influence events across the Isles is incredibly vague, there are numerous cruel and destructive abilities that the Nuckelavee has reportedly demonstrated, mostly from first-hand accounts. It's said to have incredibly toxic breath that can kill those who breathe it in, but it also kills livestock in droves and will wilt and decay crops. Whether this breath is acidic, poisonous, or something closer to necrotic damage in D&D is unclear, but it's said that the burning of kelp was often used to create an alkaline substance that would help wilting crops to grow in the harsh conditions of Orkney, and that the smell of this burning kelp was said to enrage the Nuckelavee because it undid his work. As a result of this, the Nuckelavee would cause droughts, spread diseases and plagues throughout the land, slaughter those who burn this seaweed, and would infect their livestock with a disease known as the mortacine. The mortacine is a mythical plague inspired by a very real disease known as glanders, which is a highly infectious illness which spreads among animals that are considered livestock, like horses and cattle. It's not said to transition into humans, but perhaps when creating this creature, we can make an exception. Glanders causes welts, boils, and lesions to spread throughout the lungs and respiratory tracts of horses, donkeys, and other equine adjacent creatures, causing them to spew highly infectious mucus, to choke, and to generally suffer greatly before usually dying of asphyxiation or drowning in the mucus that accumulates in their lungs, which is a vicious and horrible way to go, and I wanted to see how this would translate into Dungeons & Dragons, but to my surprise this creature has never actually made it into the pages of D&D officially. They are in Pathfinder apparently, and were published in the Blood for Blood adventure in 2010 by Neil Spicer, with supported articles by Brian Cortillo, Julian Neal, Wesley Schneider, and Todd Stewart, alongside Kevin Andrew Murphy. Hello there, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of my patrons over on Patreon for their support, but in particular, I wanted to give a shout out to all of the wonderful patrons who are backing me at the Silver Archfey level. This month you are Nicholas G. Silver, Raptor Dio, Jelly Pig, Duck Quack, Nap in Camo, Jonathan Foster, Benjamin Colburn, Yorick Beast, Ethan Dibby, Skyrush Soul, Nathan Stratton, Amanda and Jake Westfall, Ken Doman, Peter Balfe, Max Schluter, Ryan H., Tim Klima, Steve Harrison, Dan Waterman, Styrax, Colby Monroe, It's Just Avi, Sam Hickson, Brandon Kerr, Bork Boulderbender, Darth Caetana, Trevor Traub, Max Copeland, Oliver Thorvald Mellock, Dominique Jolly, AJ, Tamerling, Aldrin, Christian Palmer Smith, and Brandon Wilkinson. If you're interested in joining the little community that we have over on Patreon, I'll make sure to leave a link to that down below in my description box. Patrons get access to loads and loads of rewards, like this shoutout, but there are also shoutouts for every single patron on my monthly live stream. Every patron is entered into a raffle at the beginning of each month, where one person is randomly selected for a character illustration that might get made into a commission corner video. If you're interested in getting a commission, they get copies of all of the artwork that I do each month, which includes the video that you're watching right now. They get Patreon exclusive videos that are about my lore, my homebrew world, and my adventures in D&D. And some of us get to have one-on-one chats every month where we get to talk, and I can do some drawing for you, including things like drawing a commission while we chat. But anyway, I've taken up far too much of your time, but thank you so much for helping me to thank these guys, and I'll let you get back to your video. Cheers. But with this not officially being in 5e in any capacity, I had a look through my Kobold Press books and I couldn't see it in there. Maybe there's a new one released. Let me know down in the comments if there is an officially printed version. But either way, I thought I would homebrew my own version of the Nuckelavee, which you guys can find down in the description box below if you want to get some free stats for this monster that I've made, which is available on D&D Beyond. Now, the Nuckelavee is often referred to as a demon or a devil. In my homebrew version, I chose to make this a challenge rating 9 fiend, and specifically I called it a demon because of its chaotic and destructive nature. It doesn't seem to be wanting to lend any power, make any bargains or pacts, and there's no stories of having to perform certain rituals or rules to avoid punishment from this creature. It just seems to want to destroy. So I thought making it a chaotic creature like a demon seems to fit it quite well, although you could easily make it a devil if you so prefer. I base its stats very closely on a bone devil because it's a similar creature of a similar challenge rating. And bone devils have a similar sort of atmosphere of being these toxic, poisonous creatures that could be an end boss in a quest, but they're only challenge rating 9 and they only have 13 intelligence. They're not sort of masterminds, but their existence causes blight, panic, and chaos, and I thought that seemed fitting for a basis for this creature. Having a horse-like body or horse-like legs, I decided to make this thing have 50 movement speed, like various centaur-like creatures, so it can catch up to you, unless you are using a dash action to sprint away from it, in which case, like a horror movie villain, it's always going to be almost catching up to you. But I said that it was a little bit faster when it swims because it originally emerges from the sea. So I said its swim speed is 60 feet, but only in salt water. To that end, I made sure to include its water vulnerability of fresh water. I said that the Nuckelavee cannot stand the touch of fresh water against its exposed skin, and like a vampire, it takes 20 acid damage if it ends its turn in fresh water, which includes exposure to rain. And if the Nuckelavee takes damage from a spell that produces non-salinated water, this creature counts as vulnerable to that damage. So someone summoning a tidal wave, for example, although tidal does assume perhaps that this is salinated water, depends on the DM's ruling. But if a tidal wave did produce fresh water, the bludgeoning damage experienced would be doubled for this creature. And that's to counteract the fact that this creature is resistant to cold, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks that aren't silvered, like a lot of fiends. And I made it immune to fire and poison, and the ability to be poisoned as a condition. Because one of the things we know about this creature is that it constantly exudes this decaying and poisonous breath, and that its touch can wilt crops. To that end, I gave it something called an Aura of Decay, a passive feature that says that any creature other than the Nuckelavee that starts its turn within 10 feet of this creature must succeed on a Constitution saving throw or be poisoned until the start of the creature's next turn. On a successful save, the creature is immune to the Aura of Decay for 1 hour. This hideous and crop-wilting breath I also included in a breath attack known as the mortacine, which, like most breath weapons, recharges on a roll of a 5 or a 6 on a d6 that a DM gets to roll at the start of each turn. And I took a page out of the Catoblepass's book here, a similar creature whose breath is said to instantly kill things. And I said that the Nuckelavee exhales a blast of decaying breath in a 60-foot cone, causing creatures to make a Constitution saving throw, taking 8d6 necrotic damage on a failed save or half as much on a success. And if the save is failed by 5 or more, a target instead takes 64 necrotic damage, which, if the target is reduced to 0 HP, results in their death. I also said, because the mortacine is so intrinsically tied to equine creatures, that horses and other equine creatures, including centaurs, have disadvantage on this saving throw. Otherwise, in terms of attacks, I gave this creature a claw, a hoof attack, and a bite. Its claw is a simple 1d10 plus 4 slashing damage, its hooves deal 2d6 plus 4 bludgeoning damage, and its bite deals 2d6 piercing damage and causes people to make a saving throw, potentially taking a further 2d6 poison damage because of the decaying bacteria-infested breath that lingers on its teeth. It has a multi-attack, allowing it to make 2 attacks, either one with its claws and one with its bite, or one with its hooves and one with its claws, so you have a bit of variety in combat to mix things up, especially if someone has come prepared and doesn't take additional damage from poison. And in addition to this, I chose to give the Nuckelavee the charge feature that centaurs have because of its similar frame, stating that if the Nuckelavee moves at least 30 feet straight forward toward a target and then hits with a claw attack on the same turn, the target takes an extra 3d6 piercing damage. And I also wanted to include something about this seaweed that's used to enrage the Nuckelavee that could be used as a tactic to draw it away from vulnerable party members or as a mistake that locals might make. So I gave it an ability called Enraged Attacks that essentially makes the Nuckelavee use a barbarian's reckless attack feature, causing it to gain advantage on all of its attacks, but creatures to have advantage on attacking it if it detects the scent of burning seaweed. And it doesn't have control over this ability, it just is automatically enraged by it. So it's a great tactic for players to mess around with a high risk, high reward strategy. Now in terms of my aesthetics here, not a great deal is known about what the Nuckelavee is said to look like, aside from being a skinned man riding a horse. But according to Tamas, whose account largely describes what the Nuckelavee looks like in Denison's book, we are told, quote, that the male torso has no legs, but its arms can reach the ground from its position on top of the equine body, the legs of which have fin-like appendages. So I wanted to make sure that it had some sort of fins attached to these hooves, which was very hard to draw and not make look completely ridiculous, so that it could potentially swim through the water, if this would provide any advantage whatsoever. But I also needed to make its arms and fingers incredibly long, so that it could touch, attack, and affect things on ground level from its height atop this horse. I can imagine this creature galloping towards you with its 2 hands embedded in the ground, tossing earth and grass into the sky as it rides towards you with rage in its one eye. We're told that the Nuckelavee has a single eye that is shared between the rider and the horse-like body. It is one creature, and while it has 2 heads, I wanted to make sure that these 2 heads had different functions. So I wanted to make sure that the rider had the eye, almost periscope-like from its higher vantage point, and the horse-like head had the mouth through which this creature will do its speaking, biting, and breath attacks. Otherwise, I chose to make this thing quite demonic looking, with horn-like crests, bone-like protrusions, and other hideous features, but tried to stay true to the idea that this creature was a flayed horse and rider mixed together otherwise. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed my interpretation here. If you did, make sure to leave a little like down below. Perhaps favourite this video if you want to come back to this and get the link to get this creature's stats for free on D&D Beyond. And if you have a creature that you'd love to see in D&D, or a creature already that's in D&D that you'd love to see me cover and see my illustration interpretation of, make sure to leave that down below in the comments section, because I use all of your suggestions. And until next time, happy monster hunting.